Welcome to the Nobody Guide to Life, where we provide tips and tools for personal growth, personal development in your spiritual journey that you can use right now in your everyday life. I'm J.A. Plosker. You can always find out more at thenobodyguidetolife.com, and you can now check out videos and find episodes on the Nobody Guide to Life YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Have you ever reflected on your life and your beliefs and thought to yourself, I don't know what lies beyond the five senses and the scientific, but I can't help but feel there's something there. Maybe you're not sure where you stand on the big questions, but you know there are answers out there, answers that are right for you. Maybe you're conflicted because you feel there's a world of spirituality, maybe beyond religion, and a spirituality that can coexist with science, but you're not quite sure how to get there. For my guest today, these questions and many more like them have become the cornerstones of a lifelong search into science and spirit. Nick Jankel is an award-winning author, keynote speaker, transformation catalyst, leadership advisor, and practical philosopher who develops original thinking and powerful tools to ensure that individuals, leaders, and organizations across the planet can thrive in a period of intense challenge. His latest book, Spiritual Atheist, was a #1 new release on Amazon for 5 weeks straight, and it seeks to provide people with a life and leadership philosophy that has the power to solve the problems we all face in the areas of happiness, health, and relationships, right through to business, leadership, and politics. Nick has advised Number 10 Downing Street, Microsoft, WWF, so many more, and he has taught at Yale University and Oxford. Please welcome Nick Jankel to the show. Hello.
Hello.
I just want to let our listeners know Nick and I have waited a few months to connect for this interview, and I am just so excited about it. Your background, Nick, is really, really, really interesting.
Yes, I've had a varied journey to this moment. Here we are today, covering a lot of different bases in a search for inner peace. Ultimately, I wanted to be smart and know the answers to life, the universe, and everything. What philosopher doesn't? But I think what we all share, and this can be whether you're an abject atheist or whether you're a religious aficionado, is we want inner peace. We want a sense of calm and contentment and gratitude. And I think that's never been more the case in the world we're in today, where, every day I look at the newspaper, it's like, wow, is that really happening in this day and age? Is this time? Are we really living through this?
Right. And, I looked at your background and I took a look, at your book and all the things that you've done. And it's so interesting, this idea of spiritual atheist. And I think before we get into that, I'm really interested to know about your spiritual journey as a scientist, as a philosopher, as a seeker. What was that like for you? How did you get to spiritual atheist? What was that journey like for you?
I wish I could say it was an easy journey. It was not. But it was the ideal journey for me, as it turns out.
Right.
So when I was a teenager, I didn't have anyone giving me any particularly useful wisdom or information. I was brought up into a faith, but not hardcore, just, that kind of background faith, Sunday school kind of thing.
Right.
And around the time I was 15, I was also by then in psychotherapy, and I was an unhappy teenager. I was overweight and obese and bullied and not confident and didn't have a girlfriend and all those sort of things.
Right.
And around the time I was 15, I realized that religion, as I understood it, was not giving me nutritious answers. It wasn't inspiring me. And I didn't really know there was anything else. And I wasn't into the New Age thing at the time at all. I probably would still say I'm probably not into the New Age thing.
Right.
And so I became a proper atheist, like a sort of British anti-everything atheist in the footsteps of a Richard Dawkins type person, a really sort of I hate religion type person.
Right.
And I went to study medicine, science. And I studied science at Cambridge, which is, I call it in the book, the sort of temple of atheism. You don't do spirituality at Cambridge. There's no New Age scene at Cambridge. I was in the science department, hard science, and that was kind of a journey, and I was still always what I call now love curious.
Hmm.
So I was curious about spirituality and wisdom, but I was allergic to, dolphin music and patchouli and fads, sort of new age fads.
Right.
And that's why I carried on sort of struggling through with Western psychology for myself, for my work as a medic. And then around the age of 29, 30, I had a sort of series of what I would now call spiritual emergencies. That's one word for them. Burnout, entrepreneurial burnout, breakdown, all that kind of stuff. And in the burning up of my existing worldview and mental models and paradigms, I decided to go deep and long into wisdom. So I knew science. I knew pretty much the best we knew about the mind and well-being from the sciences. And yet I still wasn't thriving, and I didn't have inner peace. So I was like, okay, well, something's missing.
Right.
So I've got to put aside my hackles, my allergies to spiritual stuff, like the bad design, the poor branding, the stock photos,
Right.
all the stuff that I'm just like, not for me. And I dove in, and I tried to find the truth of who I am in this universe and this world. And I came back with my insights and have been wrapping that around my career, but also my own life's happiness for the last 15 years. And that's sort of the nutshell of my journey. But I have to say, doing what I do, bridging this gap between science and spirituality, it's not an easy place to be.
Right.
It's, a lot of people find it I get a lot of anger from people.
Right. And I wanted to ask you about that. You jumped headlong into scientific, entrepreneurship, and really poured yourself, at least from your words, from what I know of your work, into this materialistic realm, building businesses, making money. And then you, like you said, you plunged into this journey. And I'm curious to know who the influences were, the spiritual or personal growth influences were that you met that helped to turn the tide for you on that journey.
Well, I have to say I'm a kind of anti-guru guy.
Right.
And that's never been very easy to engage with, because people want me to also now be a teacher.
Right.
I sort of don't really want to be. I want to be, but I don't want to be guruified.
Right.
I really believe that we are our own gurus ultimately, but there are lots of great teachers.
Right.
I have to say, probably the most important path I've had has been twofold. One, I have read as close to the original text as I can, obviously in translation, of some of the major wisdom texts.
Right.
And by talented, spiritually awake translators usually. And that's been a really, really powerful part of my journey.
Right.
Has been just reading the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, the Chuang Tzu. They're all available. They're all easy to get hold of. And they're so nourishing, and they help you get to the sort of the base layer of these traditions. And then I've also been a big fan of inner journeying. So meditation, ecstatic dance, raving, dancing, clubbing, shamanic paths, breath work. And when you do enough of these things, you start to get an inner guru, access to your inner guru. And then you're reading all this stuff and you're talking with friends. And I've got a lot of friends into this stuff. And then you sort of bring it all together. And so I don't have a lineage. I'm quite rare in this field.
Right.
I haven't had like Zen master, John Smith, or Taoist Sufi master X, Y, or Z. I haven't had someone take me under their wing.
Right.
And I have wanted that at times. But whatever happened, my journey is to have lots of peers.
Yes.
Who are giving me advice, insight, I learning through them and with them. I did do some of the personal development the classic sort of Landmark Forum, Tony
Right.
Robbins, some of those things I did. Very interesting. I always sort of warn people not to get too sucked into them as a complete worldview because I think they're missing quite a bit of stuff.
Mm.
But they're definitely a good access point to some basic personal development principles.
Right. You know, Nick, I love your discussion about sort of finding your own guru. That was a very similar to the journey that I took, and I want to spend some time on that because I think it's important for our listeners to know about that because it's always been my belief. You know, I wrote a book called The Nobody Bible, and I basically talk about how some really core tenets of some of the world's great religious traditions actually are things that we tap into every day, whether we know it or not. And we don't need a license. We don't need permission to tap into these. We do need guidance, certainly. You know, I had a teacher for many years, but I love your discussion about how we can go inside and tap that inner guru and then find teachers or peers to really help us. I think that's really a powerful and very important message that you can go on this path, even if you don't necessarily have a certified lineage blessed teacher. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how you've passed that message on, how you found the courage to go on this search just by stepping into it, not necessarily having a guru right out of the gate?
Well, there's a lot in that. First of all, I have a lot of respect for lineages. But I also am a bit of a disruptor and a rebel. And
Right.
I do worry about lineages when they become encrusted in sort of barnacles. And so I talk in the book a lot about the difference between rules and principles. So I
Yes.
teach principles. And the thing about principles is every human being has to come to some principles and re-engage with them and interpret them for themselves. There's
Right.
no easy way out. Whereas rules are really easy. And so one of the reasons why priests or gurus create rules, the 7 rules of this or the 10 rules of that, obviously the 10, there's listicles online, the 10 rules of living a good life. Well, that's the 10 commandments, right? That Moses
Right.
brought down in Sinai. So we like rules and we like easy solutions, but they're actually, the minute you turn a principle into a rule, it dies. And it's locked into a time and place and a
Right.
culture, which principles live forever. So that's one thing is to find the principles and to teach principles and to make sure people don't turn my principles into rules
Right.
and then say, well, Nick said this. Well, I think Nick said that. Because then you've got, Paul and Mark and John all arguing about what Jesus said, etc., etc. And so as soon as you turn yourself into anything more than a teacher of principles, then you've become a religious prophet. And I'm
Right.
not that. And
Right.
I'm very clear on that.
Right.
And so that's kind of one piece of it, is not to feel like you need a lineage and not to feel like you need someone to give you permission
Right.
to listen to your own heart
Right.
and your own gut and your own mind. That said, one of the reasons why I don't just write books and I actually do work with people and I do develop toolkits for people to do peer-to-peer work together is that when you read a book or read an article or whatever, listen to something, it's very easy for your tricksy mind to block out the bits that might challenge your worldview and might challenge your behavior.
Right.
So you read the book and you go, yeah, but you don't let the book get into your stuff, into your real patterning, the stuff that once protected you but now limits you. So it is important not just to go on do it alone. So somewhere between listening to your own inner voice, your inner guru, your inner shaman, which by the way is not the voice that you hear, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. It's not that voice.
Right.
It's not the one going, yo, dude, you look crap. Oh my God, drink that thing, eat that thing. That's not the inner guru. So yes, you've got to listen to your inner guru, but at the same time we all need peers.
Right.
And there's actually a saying in the sort of contemporary Buddhist scene, which I like, which is the next Buddha is not a person, it's the community, it's the network, it's the Facebook tribe, whatever it is. And so I think it's important to realize that just as negative, quote, negative behaviors travel through networks, a lot of research showing that obesity, addiction travels through Facebook, essentially. So too does consciousness, awareness, love, compassion. And this is an important point. If you're in this journey and you want to get into this journey, it's important to find people who bring you into a higher quality conversation more regularly.
Absolutely.
And that means often, and certainly for me, not saying goodbye to your great dear friends from school or whenever you've met your friends or your family. You love them, you always love them, and you want to hang out with them. But it does mean maybe spending less time with them and more time with people who are committed to their own wisdom, their own consciousness, their own waking up process, and then being part of a better world, a sustainable, equal or more equal world. And that can be challenging. And just like an addict often gets triggered back into their addiction with the paraphernalia and the people that they associate with their addiction, so too do we need to sort of shift our paraphernalia, if you like, which is one of the reasons why retreat centers and ashrams and meditation halls work, because they pull you into that more open-hearted version of ourselves.
Right.
So yes, seek the new friends who are going to bring you into the future of you rather than the past of you.
Sometimes people will say to me, I don't want to leave people behind, or I don't want people to think I'm better. And there's a reminder of the idea of a radio dial. No frequency on a radio dial is really better than another frequency, but it's just more in tune. So it's if you start to go to meetups or meet people or go to meditation groups, it's not that you're better or leaving people behind. It's just you're just moving to a different frequency for a little bit, and that's okay. Nobody's saying anybody's better than anyone. No frequency is better or worse. It's just when you commit to this path, you have to turn the dial sometimes and try a different frequency. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to experience that music or hear that tune. So I love the way that you talk about that, because I think sometimes it takes courage to leave the familiar playlist, to leave the familiar songs and tune into something different. So I love that you bring that message, and the message that if you have a guru, there's nothing wrong with that. If you don't have a guru right now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's your path and it's your journey. I love that. I love that you bring that to us.
On that guru point of view, I think the other thing about a good guru is they will say to you eventually, go and find someone else. You've learned all you can learn from me. And I've got my own patterning and I've got my own stuff. So go and find someone else, because you've got everything you can get from me. Absolutely. If they don't say that and they want you as an acolyte and they want you to build them a new palace made of Rolls-Royce parts, then that's a start to question whether you're getting what you can, and whether you're now hooked into essentially some form of religion.
That's so big, because it's the idea of, hey, what if you would have stayed in Algebra 1 your whole life? We don't stay we don't go to Philosophy 101 for our whole lives. Eventually, we have to move on to another class to learn more. I love that message. I love that. I think did you ever have a teacher that said that to you? Do you remember a teacher that ever said, Nick, you have to move on from here?
I mean, I've never really had a teacher. I've never had, my sensei. I've got here through my own journey and having really amazing peers. And I include in that my wife, who's an amazingly wise woman, and we help each other a lot on this journey. Right. I have some phenomenal friends who are authors and thinkers, philosophers, gurus, whatever you want to call it, teachers. And I never get high on my own Kool-Aid. And that's a really important thing to I believe in my Kool-Aid. I love my Kool-Aid. I drink it, but I don't think it's the only Kool-Aid out there, or the only flavor. And that keeps me learning. So I'm always in what people call in the Buddhist tradition, beginner's mind. I'm always going, okay, well, that's interesting. I've got some principles. Maybe I can test this one out. Maybe it's out of date. Maybe I'm out of date. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Take us into Spiritual Atheist for a little bit. That's such an evocative. That title creates attention right from the start. And can you tell us a little bit about what that book is about and what that principle is for people that are wondering, how can I have a foot in both these worlds? I will, with Pleasure. And just what you said about it creates a tension. One of the things that I fundamentally believe is a principle of wisdom is that wisdom is the resolution of seeming opposites, seeming tensions that seem to not be able to exist together.
Yes.
Wisdom is one way of looking at wisdom is that when you dissolve those tensions into a higher order understanding, where it's both are true, I can be spiritual and an atheist. That's wisdom. So that's kind of like why that title has that kind of internal tension within it.
Right.
So spiritual atheism for me is a progression from what I call in the book materialist atheism, which is that sort of traditional big city scientific anti everything that isn't measurable in science with science.
Right.
And that I was in that part, that materialist atheist path. And then I got into my spiritual journey, and then I realized, well, I'm still an atheist. I don't believe in a God, and I don't believe in priests, and I don't believe in a Bible. I don't believe in a revealed text as if that text is the word of any God. So I'm still an atheist in the core of atheism. But I also know that there's something massively important beyond science, beyond metrics, beyond measurement, that science will probably never be able to tell us very much about.
Right.
And that is consciousness, our interiority, our experience of ourself, of love, of purpose, of peace, all these concepts that are so powerful and important, but you can't measure them and will probably never be able to measure them. But that doesn't mean they don't exist.
Right.
And so spiritual atheism is to say, ultimately, step one of spiritual atheism to say, right, if I want to thrive in my life, and I want to be a leader and a lover and a life and soul of my own life's party, then I need to be able to master the best of what science tells us about life, leadership, business, whatever. All those research studies that are done every year, building up a slow mountain of information about the material world. Brilliant. Right. Carry on. Awesome. But I also want to become a master at my interior life of consciousness. And we call the science of consciousness, we call it spiritual practice or spiritual wisdom or the wisdom traditions.
Right.
And when I first started writing the book, I was like, these two are really important. They're equals. They're complementary in the same way that we can understand where an atom is, or we can understand its movement, but we can't see both. So they're kind of complementary. They sit together in superposition. In every moment, there's consciousness and matter occurring.
Right.
Neither science nor spirituality is more important or less important. That's the first step I really wrote the book from.
Yeah.
But then as I wrote it, I realized it's not just about mastering these two worlds as if they're separate and dualistic.
Right.
It's actually about bringing them together within our one body, our one universe. So I'm a not what's called a non-dualist. I believe there's only one universe, not two,
right.
Just one. So though I talk about matter and consciousness as if they're two aspects of one reality. And I believe the work of personal development and spiritual development is to bring the best of science and the best of wisdom together within us, within our decisions, within our choices, within our relationships. Another way of saying that in a much simpler way is to reconcile what our heart senses about life. And I mean, when I say heart, I'm going to be really specific, and not our hurt heart, not our wounded, traumatized, upset heart, but our healed heart. And so therefore I'm connecting spirituality to personal growth and psychological well-being.
Right.
What our healed heart feels and what our bright, clear mind that uses philosophy and uses cognitive behavioral thinking to get rid of old thoughts and beliefs, to bring them together into one. So our heart and our mind are now aligned. They're not fighting. They're not, I feel guilty about meditating or talking about love because you can't measure it and it doesn't really exist. Letting go of all that and bringing those two together. And that for me is what spiritual atheism is about. Is it's radically practical because it's about thriving and making better decisions as a business person or whatever. But to do that, you have to understand a little bit about philosophy and about the philosophy of matter, which we call science essentially, and the philosophy of consciousness, which we call wisdom, science and wisdom. That's the two, they're like two rivers that flow into us in every moment.
I love that. And I love that the title of the book is sort of like a Zen koan. It's like one of these
Exactly.
for listen, it's a master will give a student what is the sound of one hand clapping? And of course, it's, you have to ponder that. And I love that your title gives us that kind of koan-esque feel where we meditate on the title spiritual atheist. And then as we merge those concepts, we have an aha moment of wisdom where both coexist. And
Mm.
I love that. So I think the title of the book is absolutely wonderful. And I think it does push people out of their comfort zones, because you could either be pushed out of your comfort zone by spirituality or pushed out of your comfort zone by atheist. And you have to then untangle those knots. So I think that's fantastic. Nick, how has that philosophy been received out there? I'm curious to know, because it's so
Well, yeah,
polarizing on the surface.
you've kind of captured it actually, is that I've had a lot of abuse from the religious people. Um, Actually, amazingly, people take the effort to troll you. The amount of energy and effort it takes. I don't know how people have the time. Um, so that's kind of one. I've had a quite of anti-reaction from the religious people.
Right.
But I've also had some pretty critical, cynical responses from my peers in the kind of intelligentsia.
Yes.
And in fact, I mean, my PR guy, so I did a launch in the UK and I did a launch in the US, and my PR guy in the UK had a journalist who's been sort of taking his emails and his pitches for 10 years, delist him because of my book title.
Wow.
From the Guardian, the actual newspaper I read, ironically, left, slightly left wing, sort of Washington Post style
Right.
newspaper. So, because the great and the good in the cities, they like to pour scorn on spirituality because they see it as New Age,
Right.
and they see it as and people. But if people read the book, I've had phenomenal responses from people who
Wow.
are
Yeah.
both spiritual seekers looking for more rigor and more understanding of how that fits with science and what they know about the real world. Because often people get into sort of spirituality, but they keep it as a little bubble in their life and they don't integrate it into all the other things they do.
Right.
And my book is helpful with that. But I've also had loads of people say, I'm a real anti-religious atheist, but I kind of get what you're saying and it kind of makes sense to me. And that's kind of where the book was initiated, was this love curious, real scientist loving, Silicon Valley entrepreneur, data, science, reason. But you've been to Burning Man, you've had a crazy experience. You've been on the top of a mountain and you're like, I had a moment. You've held a baby in your arms, you've made love to someone and you sort of melted for a moment. How do you, if you only believe in reason and science, how do you account for that experience, and what does it really mean about who we are in the world, and what does that mean? And that's really where the book says, how do you make sense of whether you call it spiritual experience or conscious experience or subjective experience? How do you make sense of that in a world that only really values really science at the moment?
Right. Well, I've had a very similar reaction to the Nobody Bible. So, but you have to flip the pages and look inside. And I love what you talked about before about letting it sink in, letting not just a book, but any teaching you get, you have to let it sink in. And my teacher used to talk about it as, a sponge gets hard and crusty, but if you keep dropping water on it and you allow it in, eventually it becomes soft and supple and flexible. And that's a teaching I've kept with me a long time. So, Nick, what is, with all this amazing background and all these things that you've been doing, what's a tip or tool that you can give us right now that can help us on our journeys of personal and spiritual growth? Something we can use right now.
So many, and I've already said one about community and peers and all that stuff. I'm going to talk about that inner shaman, that inner guru inside you,
Yes.
which I call variously the connector, or I call it, if I'm doing a business keynote or lecture, I talk about what I call create and connect mode. And what I believe is this part of us is always listening. It's listening right now to this podcast. It's the reason why you're even listening in the first place.
Right.
It will bring us into experiences that it thinks we need or to grow. And then we often ignore it. So it
Right.
brings us to a workshop or an event or a podcast or a book for a reason, and then our kind of cynical, what I call protective mind goes, oh, what a load of rubbish. So what I'm going to say to you, if you're listening to this, next time you have what seems like a synchronous or serendipitous connection with something, whether it's a book or a person or a bit of content, a video online, whatever it is, imagine that that thing has been brought to your attention by the wisest part of you for your puzzle. Just
Wow.
imagine that and see what happens.
I love that. That is gorgeous advice because we are inundated all day with what we consider to be positive and negative. But if you see them as just signposts, they take on a whole new meaning. And when you drop your judgment of what you're seeing and just immerse yourself in it, it can ignite a fire. I love that advice, Nick. I love it. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of this episode of the Nobody Guide to Life. Nick, thank you so much for being on the show. What a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for the airtime and to share my passion, my purpose.
It was wonderful. And I want to remind our listeners, we don't always know the answer to life's biggest questions, but it doesn't mean we can't search for them. And maybe we don't have to be seekers of science or spirit, but seekers of the scientific and the spiritual. Maybe the truth isn't so much about what we leave out, but what we include. Maybe that's what makes us whole. You can find Nick's book, Spiritual Atheist, at Amazon, or you can check out his website at switchonnow.com. He's got all kinds of interesting information there. Links to his books are there. You really should read about his background. It's very, very, very interesting. And all those links will be in our show notes at thenobodyguidetolife.com. And you can always check out more episodes at thenobodyguidetolife.com or now the Nobody Guide to Life YouTube channel. Check us out on Twitter and Facebook at Nobody's View or on Instagram at J.A. Plosker. Or join our Facebook community, Simple Spirituality. If you liked what you heard on this episode, please consider sharing it with someone you know, someone you think could really use it. Keep practicing and have a good week.